Human occupation of the Australian continent stretches back a little farther than the 1700s, but long before Captain Cook laid claim to the southern land, an indigenous population called the country home for many tens of thousands of years. Across the land is an abundance of sites considered sacred, quite often as a direct result of what happened in the dream time.
The dream time is a somewhat misleading term, conjuring the image of lots of people passed out around the campfire after a heavy night on the terps. Creation period is a far more accurate term, for this is a religious philosophy for how all things came to be.
Although the stories will vary between the different linguistic groups, the basic essence of it remains the same. So what follows is our interpretation of the dreaming.
A long time back before the beginning of all things, the land was flat and featureless. There were no rivers, trees, mountains or lakes. A bit like today. Then from deep beneath the ground, the ancestral spirits arose, possessing the attributes of both man and beast and the power akin to deities. They rose up out of the ground and they said, "Oh bugger, there's nothing here." And there wasn't. And so the ancestral spirits wandered out in all directions and began their adventures. They dug for water, leaving behind lakes and wells. Battles were fought, and the bodies of the dead turned mountains and hills. Food they brought with them was eaten, the seeds cast down, and plants began to grow. And the tracks of the great water snakes became the rivers. And so all the features of the landscape are tied to the passing of these ancestral spirits. To control the chaos, they created laws. And then for the final act, they made mankind. And they said unto man, "We give him all this here to you people, and all this here law, and you got to look after this here place." And mankind said unto those ancestral spirits, "Okay." From here the ancestral spirits wandered off to their chosen abodes. Some became strange features on the landscapes. The water snakes submerged themselves in the deep pools, while others placed themselves onto rock walls as paintings. And here the spirits remain today in a dormant state. And at these sacred sites, the custodians perform ceremonies to invoke the powers of these sleeping ancestral spirits, to provide prosperity to the land, to bring the rains for the plants, the animals, and the people. At least that's my version of the events. Wilms, do you have more wine?
You've had enough.
This is Carnarvon, the banana growing capital of Western Australia, and seems to have recovered quite well since Cyclone something or other came through and gave it a good thrashing a month or two ago.
Cyclone Olwen was predicted not only to wipe Carnarvon off the map, but Geraldton also, and even give Perth the rattling. While Carnarvon suffered moderate damage, all the southern cities saw was a lot of hype. Carnarvon is around 900 kilometers north of Perth and the regional centre for the Gascoyne. It's built on the mouth of WA's longest river system, which is also called the Gascoyne. The region itself has WA's lowest population density, and most of that population exists in Carnarvon. There was even a NASA space tracking station here, which is now a museum open to the public.
The township was founded in 1883 as a port and supply centre and named after an English politician, Henry Herbert. He also happened to be the 4th Earl of Carnarvon. That's all gobbledygook to us, but don't say we didn't tell you.
There are plenty of caravan parks in and around town, and we find ourselves at the Winter Sun, which seems quite nice. We'll be spending a few days here preparing for our next excursion. Then it's time to fuel up and head out into the wilds. For this episode, we're basing ourselves out of Carnarvon. So we've just left that coastal town and we're heading inland, about 165 miles to our first stop, which is going to be Gascoigne Junction. From there, we're going to head north up into the rugged Kennedy Range. Then we'll proceed to the world's largest monolith, Mount Augustus.
Being from Gerald, one grows up occasionally hearing of a distant mythical place called Gascoigne Junction. It does exist and was founded in 1897 when a police station was built, and now claims a population of 200 people. We saw 3. We've arrived at the junction. There's a lot less going on here than I even imagined. From the junction, it's about 80 kilometres or so to the Kennedy Ranges, but things go bad real quick. It appears the far side of the causeway has been washed away by the river, leaving a deep, impassable trench. I don't think we'll be going that way. That is a spanner in the works.
Damn it!
After that unexpected catastrophe, we decide not to let certain failures stand in the way of progress, and we find ourselves driving kinda aimlessly further out into the bush.
The countryside has seen not just a lot of rain, but a lot of rain over a long period of time, making it very wet. Great if you're a duck. Eventually, we find a suitable little roadside camp.
We're boiling corn, roasting spuds, frying onions, and grilling steaks. This is a feast fit for royalty.
After the little snafu with the river crossing, we've had to make a diversion. So we're going to go to Mount Augustus first, and we found ourselves a nice little bush camp en route. The only problem is that there's a lot of mosquitoes here.
Oh, mosquitoes! Clouds! You know, when we first got here, the flies were thick. There wasn't even a shift change between the two. There was an overlap. For a good 10 minutes, we got to enjoy both species in abundance. Loved it. There are plenty of other strange little inhabitants occupying the vicinity. Large wood moths, looper grubs, noisy katydids, pebble-like gibber grasshoppers, crickets, and hairy garden orb spiders. It's a busy neighbourhood. I'm just out here enjoying the flies. I make for a miserable existence. Oh. This horribleness makes conditions out here hard to tolerate. The prolific rains have caused a plague. Fly numbers here are always bad, yet this is the worst I've ever seen them.
This is all station country out here, and unfortunately, cows are great at manufacturing ideal breeding grounds for the flies. Cattle are also a real traffic hazard out on these remote roads. All the tributaries of the Gascoyne are flowing, slowing our progress with numerous water crossings. Debris on the water depth indicator shows how high the floods got this year. After quite a few hundred kilometers of dirt roads, our destination is in sight.
The local Wajadi call this chunk of stone Budgerigar, and it towers 715 metres above the surrounding plains and 1,105 metres above sea level, boldly proclaimed as the world's largest rock.
Surrounding the mountain is a 49-kilometer circuit drive that under normal conditions may be drivable in a two-wheel drive, but after the stormy season would be quite a challenge. Washouts and deep sand would make it hard without a 4x4. Little side roads take the traveler into points of interest along the way that offer hiking trails. There, we find an option to undertake the 6-hour summit hike, but as the current fly population makes just existing unbearable, we're opting for a shorter stroll.
It's a rare privilege to see the country in such conditions, with all the ponds full and water flowing down the rocks. The resources these mountains offered made them a focal point for the native Australians, and evidence of their long occupation can be found etched into the hard rock.
We've discovered some Aboriginal petroglyphs here in this lovely little cave. You can see on the wall and the surrounding rocks.
These etchings are usually quite abstract in their execution, making interpretation of their meaning difficult, unless you were present for the story being told thousands of years ago.
The place is like a furnace in the summer months and generally very arid. Yet there are unlikely residents in abundance and taking advantage of the excellent conditions. There is no shortage of frogs along the rocky watercourse. The most common is a ubiquitous amphibian of the arid zone called the little red tree frog. This handsome and active species valiantly combats the bug infestation, with little results.
In addition to the frogs are large spiders such as the St. Andrew's cross. They are relatives to the much larger golden orb weaver. At certain times of prosperity, infestations of aggressive little caterpillars, I believe are nicknamed loopers, arrive and begin to voraciously devour as much as they can before turning into moths. They are certainly not welcome around the crops near Carnarvon.
Another of the short walks takes us up to a rather small lookout over the surrounds.
I've heard many things about Mount Augustus. It's been called a monocline and a monolith, and people say that it's twice as large as the more famous Uluru or Ayers Rock. Now, walking around here, I'm not seeing it myself. There is natural beauty, don't get me wrong. It just appears to be like any other big hill in the region. I'm seeing a lot of different types of rocks here. I'm seeing quartz and varying types of sandstone of different size grains. So what all the fuss is about, I'm not quite sure. So as it turns out, Mount Augustus is a monocline and twice as big as Uluru, which is a monolith. One rock. In my personal opinion, Augustus claiming largest rock status may be pushing the boundaries a little bit.
Not to understate its natural beauty, however, as well as the remoteness. You compare Uluru's yearly visitation of 270,000 people to Augustus having around 10,000 people? If the flies would bugger off, it would be quite nice.
Nearby is a little river that may or may not contain water year-round. It certainly has plenty at the moment. Loving that are huge numbers of birds, notably budgerigars. These tiny and familiar parrots are native to Australia and can be a very common sight out in the arid areas of the country where they prefer to reside. In good seasons they can be seen in huge flocks, many hundreds strong, flying swiftly like a big green cloud. The reason for their large numbers can be seen by their enthusiastic and vigorous romancing outside the tree hollow they call home.
Other birds enjoying these conditions are the sacred kingfisher, a deadly enemy to large insects and small reptiles. Cockatiels, although fairly common, are easily missed, but if you know their calls, it can give them away. The rainbow bee-eater is a widespread, familiar, and beautiful bird, masterful at taking insects on the wing. The male red-capped robin is a stunningly dressed inhabitant who excels at ambushing insects. Two more conspicuous characters are the pink and gray galah and the rather noisy little corella. Both are found far and wide, and both can appear in large flocks. Lining the creeks are the big white trees known as river redgums, which are possibly the most widespread of all the gazillion eucalypts across Australia. Accommodation, fuel, and limited supplies can be obtained at a station homestead not far from the park. We, however, have a long way to go and trundle a little farther down the way to camp roadside. If you've ever brought store-bought bread on an extended camping trip, you know that its survival rate is usually pretty low. So that's why it's a good idea to know how to make damper. It might have the consistency and taste of a brick, but it's a pretty good vehicle for both jam, butter, and honey. So I'm going to show you our version of damper. We've got a few ingredients that we're going to use. The first of which is flour. 2 cups of plain flour, 1.5 spoonfuls of baking powder to add fluff. The next thing you need is a little bit of salt, probably about 1/2 teaspoon, but since I'm guessing most of you don't bring measuring spoons out on a camping trip, probably about maybe that much, maybe a little less. Now some people like to use beer with this recipe, but tonight I'm going to be drinking wine. Because we all know that cooking's that much better with a little bit of a buzz. All right, back to the damper. We're going to use 3/4 cup of milk and then put that into our dry ingredients. Mix that all together. Check it for consistency. You want it to be, well, dough-like. At a certain stage, you might want to get your hands in there as well, but yeah, you're just going to have to ignore the cleanliness issue. First thing you want to do is preheat your camp oven. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to stick it in the fire so it gets nice and hot. So I've got the dough about the size and consistency that I want. It's just a small one because it's only the two of us. So the next thing I'm going to do, because we got our camp oven preheated, I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of flour in there just to make sure nothing sticks. And place the dough in there. Now, it's a well-known fact that long blondish hair is highly flammable, and it's always good to give your partner the opportunity to be chivalrous. So that's why I'm handing the cooking portion over to Mr. Foreman.
Part of being professional is looking professional, so I'm going to bluff my way through this as best I can. We're going to take this pot over to the fire. Create a base, but be careful it's not too thick. Not uncommon to burn these. Now we're going to put the lid on, which is preheated somewhere over here. Once the lid goes on, we'll get another spoonful of whatever this is, a shovel full of coals, and sprinkle it over the top. So remember, when you're operating around fires, safety first. Even at this late hour in the afternoon, the flies are still horrendous. Lovely. Now we're going to check the damper because you can't measure the heat like you can on the conventional oven, so it is a bit hit and miss. You have to be careful. If it's not hot enough, the thing's going to have trouble cooking and it's going to be a disaster, and if it's too hot, it's going to burn, and that's going to be catastrophic. Oh my word. It's coming along nicely, so we'll check that again in 10.
All right, so if this comes out clean, it means it's done.
Hygiene.
Looks good. Well, this is intended for breakfast, but it's probably good practice just to test it out. So, nice and hard on the outside, but soft in the middle, which is what we want.
Suspected of being the water holding frog, this character is doing well under the lights. These frogs are able to form a protective cocoon from their own shedded skins and stay underground for many months during the hot, dry times. The long journey back to the Kennedy Ranges begins with yet more water crossings. Along the way are red kangaroos, more cockatiels, and healthy numbers of brown falcons perched on branches and pouncing on morsels. Closer inspection reveals huge numbers of chunky caterpillars that we suspect are some form of hawk moth. The falcons are not the only creatures preying on the grubs. My best guess at the identity of this little monster is that of a juvenile earwig, or as I called them as a child, toe biters. It seems our alternative route into the Kennedy Ranges was a success, although it was a very long way to go, and the roads have suffered greatly from rain damage. Tomorrow morning we'll begin our assault on the Kennedy Range, and the flies, no doubt, will begin their assault on us. We arrive at a deserted campsite with its own maggot-infested shice house. The road through to the junction will be cut off for some time, blocking all but the most dedicated visitors.
Flies are always going to be out here in the warmer months, but some years, like this year, they're a lot worse than others. So no matter how hardcore a bushman you think you are, you're going to need long pants, long shirt, a fly net is a must, and a can of strong insect repellent.
The majority of the walks in the area are accessible from the campsite, so the traveler can just set up and wander off.
I've begun my little stroll into Temple Gorge, and if I may presume, this rocky structure behind me has been the inspiration for the naming of this area. The conditions are muggy, sweaty and nasty, with no end of unpleasant company. I wish I listened to Wilms about the fly net. Oh, hello. You gotta be very careful walking the track of little amphibious pedestrians. You don't want to crush them underfoot. The northern Spadefoot frog is an unusual looking character found from here north. These rotund little fellows are generally nocturnal, so I don't know what he's up to at this ungodly hour. The final destination of Temple Gorge Trail, a little skanky pool at the base of a dry waterfall. There's even a sign that tells you, end of trail.
The Kennedy Range was gazetted as a national park in 1993 and features a sandstone plateau that rises 80 meters or so above the scrublands. It's an isolated feature stretching 75 kilometers lengthwise and up to 25 kilometers in width. The range formed a natural border between two separate Aboriginal groups. Its whitefella name comes from a previous governor of the state.
Time has come to take the long way back to Carnarvon. We don't want to tell you how far it is exactly. Let's just say it's too far.
We hope you enjoyed the second installment of Western Walkabout. Now in episode 3, we'll take you to the Ningaloo Reef at Coral Bay, the township of Exmouth, and Cape Range National Park, where we come face to face with a cyclone. We look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, bye.